We are very proud and happy to have today Mr. Marco Tamborini from the University of Darmstadt here. He's a philosopher who did his PhD in Heidelberg and later on his habilitation in Darmstadt, if I'm correct. And he had several stations in, I have to find it, Cambridge, Pisa, Lausanne, and Regensburg as guest philosopher, guest scientist, and assistant professor, or how you would call it. And he is pronouncedly working in the intersection between science and philosophy and engineering, including topics as AI, bioengineering, biorobotics, biology, and stuff like this. The title of his talk is AI, Robotics, and the Human Being, Rethinking Boundaries Through Translation. And we are very happy to have you here. And without further ado, I give you the stage, and we are looking forward to see the talk. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Stefan, thank you, Wolfgang, for this very kind invitation. And I really look forward to this presentation and to discussion. As Stefan said, I will I will give my presentation in English. So let's start with my philosophical presentation on robotics or biorobotics. Two recent PNAS papers argue that humans and artificial intelligence are becoming increasingly interdependent. This growing interdependence could lead to humans and AI no longer acting as separate actors, so human there, AI on the other hand, but as new collective evolutionary individuals, so AI and human as a collective evolutionary ones, right? In this scenario, humans gradually lose their autonomy and identity, not through coercion, but through increasingly functional integration. So human and AI, human and technology as becoming a new entity. In extreme cases, distributed AI could function as an information center that coordinates human behavior, memory, and decision. Humans, on the other hand, would continue to perform physical, energetic, and reproductive functions. So AI would be the brain, and humans would be the body. Humans thus would remain the barriers of biological evolution, but their success would increasingly depend on the integration with AI. AI, the brain, human body is the machine, human body, the machine, and the software, the hardware, let's put it that way, and together will be the new unity for selection. However, this rather disturbing perspective is based on a fundamental assumption: the loss of a clear boundaries between humans, biology, and technology. This also changes the image of what a human being is or is supposed to be. So what these laws of boundary mean? And what roles does human play in technological production, in today's technological production? Which kind of role do we have in technological productions? In this presentation, I focused on the role of humans in the development of new technologies. In this case, in my case, in the development of embodied AI, which means robots, bio-inspired robots. And in this presentation, I will pursue two main goals. The first is to clarify the recent dissolution of boundaries, between the natural and the technological, biology and technology. And I propose the argument that boundaries should not be confused with barriers, and that the solution of boundaries is epistemological and not ontological. What is dissolving are the boundaries of how we categorize, act, and produce knowledge in the fields of biology and technology. However, the barriers that prevent ontological identification, that means that's the ontological identity between a machine and the organism. So these boundaries remain firmly in place. So distinction of boundaries, dissolution of boundaries is epistemological and not ontological, first arguments. The second point derives from the first one. Since Since humans know themselves through their actions and are reflected in their cultural and thus technical products, so since we know who we are when we produce something and we reflect on our products, right? The definition of the human being, the definition of humans, or rather one aspect of this definition must emerge from the epistemological dissolution of the boundaries between robotics, means technology, and biology, as is happening today. So when we reflect on what we produce robots. Robots are a product of our doing. So we should also change the image, the definition, or at least one property of the human being as it emerges when we are producing robots. And human can be, and that's the second point, so the main topic, the main argument that we're offering you here, humans can be identified as translators, as mediators between different languages. From these 2 points, I will outline a further conclusion, a further argument in the conclusions. The shifting of boundaries in a very, in this sense that I've just exposed you, show the absolute importance of the terrain that lies beyond them. That means the purely ontological and ethical terrain. Very abstract, I will concretize everything following this, this outline. First, I will explain the distinction between barrier and boundaries following 2 philosophers who are Kant and Wittgenstein. Then I will, briefly expose what is the object of my reflection, according to which we can at least, understand the features of the human beings better. And the object of my reflection is biorobotics. So this bio-inspired discipline that aims at construct robots that can be interpreted. That can construct robots that mimics natural processes, and looking or working on biorobotics will then reflect on the features of the human being in the loop of biorobotics. And I will propose and defend the thesis that human being should be defined as Homo translator, Homo translator. Okay, so first thing first, barriers, and the dissolution or removal of boundaries. So as mentioned, we must first understand what boundaries and barriers are and how they relate to each other. So what we're talking about, dissolution of boundaries between biology and technology, but what are these barriers or boundaries, right? And the words of Kant and this philosophy of boundaries can help us here. In the Prolegomena, Kant wrote, boundaries in extended beings always presuppose a space that is encountered outside a certain specific place and encloses. Barriers do not require this, but are mere negations that affect a quantity unless it has absolute completeness. Barriers are mere negations, but boundaries are at the same time something positive. Okay, with this distinction, Kant makes 2 essential points that I'm going to pick up. Among many others, he said that he claims that the physical and mathematical sciences operate within experimental, limits or experimental boundaries, without the need to go beyond and existing beyond. Science is based on the relationships between the subject and the phenomena, not on knowledge of the thing in itself. First point. So we are operating within the limit of our experience, right? Boundaries are, second point, boundaries are flexible and dependent on new scientific discoveries. So we can, we can set the boundaries again and again according to the new kind of experience and discoveries that we are collecting. Wittgenstein raises another problem, which, in my opinion, is related to this, quote or sentences or to the problems of the Kantian philosophy. Wittgenstein wrote, if someone drew a sharp boundary, I could not recognize it as the one I always wanted to draw or drew in my mind, for I did not want to draw any at all. One could then say his concept is not the same as mine, but is related to it. And the relationships is that of two images, one consisting of blurred patches of color, the other of similarly shaped and distributed but sharply defined patches. The relationships is then as undeniable as differences. So, with this and similar, aphorisms, Wittgenstein seeks to emphasize that certain concepts cannot be precisely defined. Certain concepts cannot be precisely defined because they depend on how they are used within a system of practices. So we can define in a very, stable sense a lot of concepts, since the meaning of these concepts depends on how we use them within, a set or system of practices. Furthermore, the use of language is based on a system of goals that is, within the action itself and subjects to different or particular, forms of life. For example, to direct the discussion toward the, analysis of scientific practices, the concept of machine in biology has very different boundaries and thus different uses than the concept of machine in engineering. The boundaries that determine their use are not clearly and precisely defined, but fuzzy, vague, implying a possible shift and a sort of relationship between different concepts. So different concepts and different boundaries, and the meaning of the concept is within this boundary. So the concept of boundaries and borders or limits in the philosophy of Kant, Wittgenstein, illustrates that knowledge is a dynamic and constantly evolving process that depends on the flexibility of the boundaries of knowledge production. Wittgenstein emphasizes the concept cannot be defined absolutely in a very monolithic and metaphysical sense, as their meaning varies in the concept of practices, leading to a concept of knowledge as as something that is knowledge production, which is flexible and and relative. For this reason, and this is the first sort of conclusion on which I will base my arguments, the dialogue between this philosophical perspective presents a picture of knowledge as a dynamic and constantly evolving process in which the boundaries of knowledge are never fixed, but always open to new interpretation and development. So work in knowledge production is always, it's always something that should again and again made. The boundaries themselves are given, and and we can define them only within the framework of the epistemological use of our reason. So, dissolution of boundaries and culture. Following a sort of fundamental principle of Western philosophy, which has been expressed in various ways since at least Descartes, knowledge develops through the production of representation, through which the subject reshapes experience and generates judgments on or artifacts of various kinds. So we can produce knowledge since we represent the world, and the subject, the ego, whatever, is in the middle of this knowledge production. Cultural products, that is, every product of our representative activity, are tools for ordering our possible world by shifting its boundaries from time to time. We produce something, we produce cultural products, and we make sense, we order the world, and we shift the boundaries of our possible experience from time to time. The underlying postulates, which I share here, is that there is a sort of distance between the subject and the world, which the subject attempts to bridge through representative action. As Blumenberg said, the human being as animal symbolicum is a being designed to avoid confrontation with reality. So there is a gap between subject and objects, and by representing the world, we attempt to close this gap, to bring the world back into the subject and to expand the boundaries of our cognitions. So if we accept these points, the key questions arises. How does the image of the human being change with the merging of new bio-inspired disciplines? These disciplines aim to learn directly from nature in order to create, kind of bio-inspired techno-natural objects. Do these kind of disciplines add new features to the definition of the human being, and what this means in terms of possible boundary dissolutions? To do that, to answer this question, we should first focus on the discipline that we are going to investigate, which is biorobotics. Okay, biorobotics can be considered as a scientific discipline in its own right, whose main goal is to understand adaptive and intelligent behavior through the construction of bio-inspired technological artifacts, which are robots. Experiments in this field often involve robots that are used as tools for researching and simulating complex biological phenomena. Within biorobotics, there are, of course, various practices, each pursuing different and specific scientific goals. So biorobotics is an umbrella term, and there are a lot of sub-disciplines within biorobotics or under biorobotics. Among them, we have classical biorobotics. Yes. Classical biorobotics, represents the most established form of the field. Here, scientists construct bio-inspired robots to replicate the so-called morpho-functional features of animals, or to test hypotheses about evolutionary mechanisms through their robotic reproductions. An example, to give you an image, scientists here create a bio-inspired robots called pleo robots. This is an early lifelike robotic salamander. And they reconstruct or they create the robot, so the robot is up there. And the robot is air in this diagram, and air is a model of the object under investigation, which is the subject, the salamander locomotion. So they construct the robots to investigate the locomotion of animals, in that case, locomotion of salamanders. So the robot is the sort of the model, the embodied model of their investigations. In this case, so scientists use robots to ask biological questions or to test biological mechanisms. Another kind of biorobotic practice is the so-called interactive biorobotics. Interactive biorobotics represents a sort of advanced form of biorobotics, as it goes beyond simply biological imitation to create robots that can interact with living organisms. These robots do not just collect data or test or being constructed to test hypotheses, but actively influence the behavior of animals. So interactive biorobotics. Why is interactive? Since this kind of discipline is about interaction between a robot and a possible animal. To give you an example here, 3 years ago, scientists in Pisa constructed a robot that was the perfect replica of a fish. And then they constructed another robot which was more or less the same perfect replica of the fish, but they added a couple of morphological or functional anomalies. Why that? Since they want to test the phenomenon of social distancing. So 2 robots, one was a perfect copy of the fish up there. Second robot, almost a perfect copy, plus they added a couple of morphological, the form was a little bit, or the color was a bit different, or functional, it behaves strangely. And then they let the robots interact with the fishes. Why? To understand which kind of mechanism of social distancing the fish's population would come up with to accept or reject the robots as part of their community. So again, this is a case of interactive robotics or biorobotics, since the robot interacts with an animal, in this case a fish. And scientists construct the robots to enter into the fish dynamics, populations, or wherever. And the fish is a kind of the key access point to this population. And in the first example, the salamander movement, there's no interaction at all. So the salamander represents or embodies a mechanism, locomotion of salamander, for example. Here, what scientists are about is, let me see if you have an example, sorry, is, I don't have a slide here, it's to introduce the robots within a different population, right? So interactive biorobotics. Third example of biorobotics, that's the most exciting one, I guess. Bio-hybrid robots. So bio-hybrid robotics aims to overcome the limitation of conventional robots by integrating biological elements such as living cells or tissues with synthetic materials. This approach allows the creation of hybrid systems that combine biological and artificial properties. An emblematic example is the use of engineered muscle cells to develop micro devices that can move autonomously. The main difference from classical biorobotics is that while the latter is inspired by biology to mimic natural functions, biohybrid robotics integrates real biological components into robotic systems. The goal is not to just imitate nature, but to design collaborative units in which biological and technological components work together to achieve, something that cannot be achieved otherwise. So biohybrid, basically, we can get like, we take biological tissues or muscles, for example, and we, let's put that way, install on, artificial components. To construct something like that, that's an artificial array that can be moved, can follow, artificial, like stimuli can be guided or controlled through a particular environment, and it moves autonomously since it's based on it's on muscles basically. Okay. Or to give you an example about the first biorobotics enterprise, which is classic biorobotics. A very good example, since we are in Berlin, is the robots. Robots. Maybe we are familiar with this robot, which was the result of collaboration between the HU Berlin and the EPFL in Lausanne. And these robots up over there, or down there, this one, mimics the behavior of an extinct organism, the Urbas papste. So this robot is, is a copy, let's put it that way, although it's completely wrong what I'm saying, but it's a copy of an extinct organism. And it's based on the biomimetic principle, and using, the biomimetic principle, so it's copying nature. Scientists in Berlin and in Lausanne could study the locomotion and functionality of extinct organisms by reconstructing their form-function relationships. So researchers analyze the anatomy of related living organisms, gain functional insights, and design robots that replicate these characteristics to generate new data and ask biological questions that would be difficult to explore without robots, since this kind of organisms are no longer extinct organisms. So how can we experiment with them? The idea was we can construct a robot that is a replica of this organism and embody this kind of mechanism, and we can use the robot in a very in experimental setting and to ask new biological questions. For example, this robot, the robots, enable the study of the evolutionary transition from aquatic to terrestrial animals. So biorobotics is based, and then what I'm giving, and that can be maybe read from the example that I'm giving. Biorobotics and all the bio-inspired disciplines, among others AI, is though not based on the principle of the pure imitation of nature, but on the principle of the principle of translation. The natural forms and biological mechanisms observed and described by biologists, remember the extinct fish, the extinct organisms, or the fish over there, on the salamander locomotion. So these principles are translated into a technological language and find expression in robotics artifacts, so in the robots. This practice of translation is at the heart of the biorobotics approach. It's not just a matter of copying nature, but of interpreting it and transforming it into a mechanical model that make it possible to test hypotheses and generate new knowledge. This, the robots, or the salamander robots, and even the interactive biorobotics, this kind of examples show that the process of constructing bio-inspired robots is basically not a matter of imitation, but something to do with translation. Since we translate a biological language into a technological one, and then back into a biological language. Yes, if what I'm saying is more or less correct, we can discuss about them. So about the distinct dissolution of boundaries, we should be clear that it's not about ontological dissolution, but epistemological one. So it's not about what nature per se is and technology per se is, but it's about how we perceive, construct, act, whatever, within nature and within technology. Plus, if there is a kind of distinction or a gap between the subject and the objects, and when we construct, when we represent the world, we try to close the gap, and when we represent the world, we create cultural products such as cultural products like scientific discipline, etc., etc. And when we reflect on them, we also gain insight into definition of human beings. If this, it's more or less sound, we should then reflect further on the notion of translation that I'm, proposing here, to understand how we can close the gap between biology and technology from an epistemological perspective. The notion of translation that I'm, pushing here to understand the new technologies, among them biorobotics, presupposes a sort of higher principle. which is the principles of reversibility. Quick break. Okay. To translate the word, when we translate the word, we presuppose this higher principle, the principles of reversibility. The principles of reversibility is the principles of being able to move between two different positions, text, or, with Wittgenstein, language games, while maintaining the same degree of functionality, economy, and convenience in translation. The principles of reversibility goes as follows. A text A, for example, in German, is translated into text B, let's say Italian. To check whether this is a comparatively adequate translation, I can translate the text B, the Italian one, back into text A, the German one, without knowing it beforehand. So I let the other person translate the text for me and obtain a different text, text C. If the text C, prompts me to play a similar language game to text A, so, without Wittgenstein, if the text B helps me, provides me, with the same story, with the same forms of life that which is in the text A, and then this translation, the translation B, is an adequate translation. So again, text A and text B, I translate text B back into text A, and if the text C, helps me re-enter the text A, so narrates the same story with the same flavor, then the text B is a good translation. So far so good. I don't know, but so far so good. Let's assume that. Okay. Let's give a very good example, since I'm Italian, is the following one. I Promessi Sposi. Alessandro Manzoni's famous historical novel, I Promessi Sposi, The Betrothed, in which the author describes the events surrounding the betrothed Renzo and Lucia. So at the end of the book, Manzoni, the author, makes the message of the story clear by calling it the sugo della storia, sauce of the history. Sugo is sauce. The Italian word sugo means indeed sauce, right? And Manzoni, so the author of the book, uses this word to better convey his message of, of the divine providence to the poor and uneducated classes of Italy in the second half of the 19th century. Just as the sauce on pasta gives the dish flavor and unity, so the sauce of history is the meaning that gives the whole story flavor and significance. Right, so we have, as said, sugo della storia, the source of the history, and I've brought here a couple of translations. We have the original one, which is the up there. Since I don't have the translation of my sorry,
microphone has just dropped, so I'll fix it again. Okay.
We have the original one. Oh, there's another one. We have the original one, the Manzoni's text over there. We have the English one, where the translator translates or translated the sugo di tutta la storia with the moral of our story. We have the German ones with the Kant and Wittgenstein, the Spanish one, Hugo de toda la historia, and the French one, de pensée de toute l'histoire. Okay, so which one is the comparatively more appropriate translation? Why? The Spanish, said one person from the audience. Why?
Well, exactly, and then the juice comes in stronger, like if they actually use juice.
Right.
Or like yeah. But the Spanish person, I said that it's the only language that uses a liquid as well, but now the Spanish next to me says that you would never say that in Spanish. So
Okay, why not?
you want to say that?
Mm-hmm. Let's consider this 19th century translation. No, but it's just curious to hear first your. Why the yeah?
I have a question because I don't speak Italian.
Yeah.
And I understand sugo is sauce, but if you said to me the sauce of the story, I would think that's a little piquant extra as opposed to the essence of the story, which is the current. So I don't know because I don't know the original meaning. So I can only take it as I received it in the translation. I can't have an opinion.
Okay. Since since you don't know the original one, right?
Because I don't speak Italian, so I don't have the feel
text.
for how that word's used in Italy. Even though I know that sugo was sauce, but I don't know how Italians use sauce.
Right, but I mean,
metaphorically.
but generally,
Yes, I know, but I understand that that's an option. But so I can assume, well, that sounds good. But it sounds good, but I don't know.
right? Okay, so that just before answering, yeah.
We had carbonara today in a pizzeria. I would say in an Italian food, the sauce is the core. It is really the essence of what was good in it. If you have a German sauce, you put it over it, not in it. So if you translate it, it's a different language game.
Right. Okay. To explore which kind of translation is the most, comparatively, the most appropriate, I think we should use the, the principles of reversibility. Since, I mean, it's a very good principle that can help us, see to what extent, this kind of, story can be re-narrated and we can get closer to the original one, right? Plus, of course, I mean, you may argue, as you said, I don't know Italian, so I don't know the original, the source text. So I don't know how to translate it. But generally, I mean, and we can discuss later, when you translate something, you a little bit you are at least familiar with the language, the original language, right? So that you can approach it in a very particular way, right? And if you use the principles of reversibility, I think that the German, the French, and the English translations, they, first they are all very good translation. 19th century translation apparently, immediately after Manzoni published his book. So of course, plus the language is 19th century language in each of these translations is text, right? But the German, the French, and the English translations, they capture the literal meaning. So the overreaching lesson that the author is trying to convey, but they do not represent or they do not stress, emphasize, or push the visual aspects that the author is using to convey his message to an uneducated, to the uneducated readers, right? I mean, the word Hugo, you come from Spanish-speaking country, you said, right? The word Hugo means Exactly. So with Jewish Saft or whatever. So with these words, the translator comes very close to the Italian word sugo, since he visually clarifies the meaning of the expression to the reader in a possible word that is comparable, sorry, to the given source word. So that means that if we retranslate or translate the Spanish translation back into Italian ones, we would use maybe a different word, not sugo, but maybe succo or whatever, so another word in Italian that will convey the same message, will present the same possible word, so that the readers, 19th century readers, can obtain more or less the same message that is part of the original text, right? So the principles of reversibility helps us understand or decide which kind of translation is comparability, is more or less the more appropriate, right? And say, okay, if we can choose, we will pick up the Spanish one, right? If this, sound more or less, plausible, we have a problem, since according to the theory that I'm proposing you, the theory that I'm proposing you, robotics or technology is about translations, right? And translation is about, retranslating something back into the source text so that we can see to what extent our translation is well-grounded, right? So the problem that we have that we, we cannot translate back robots into, living organisms, right? Since, at least as of today, it's quite impossible to, translate the robots. Remember the robot that was based on extinct organisms. It's impossible to retranslate it back and have a living organism, right? So that seems that's the notion that I'm offering you, it doesn't fit to technology. But still, I think that's it's still possible to translate them back and to see if the translation is more or less a good one translation. How? I cannot completely reverse translate and recombine the salamander robots to obtain a living organism again. What remains, though, is the complex form and function of the salamander organism. And to test if one translation is comparatively more appropriate than another one, we only need to insert the robots into the salamander life form and see if it moves in the same way in a possible environment, given the structure of the design robots. And as you can see here, if I translate the salamander form-function complex of locomotion back and put it into the same salamander environment, it can swim and work exactly as salamander living organism. So my translation is comparatively more appropriate than others, since in the process of constructing a robot, give me a sec, as you can imagine, scientists produces different versions of the salamander robots, right? So why this one is the most appropriate? Since it can be retranslated back, so it can be put into the same environment of salamander and can move exactly as a salamander does. In the case of the interactive robot, biorobotics is even easier. To what extent my translation is a comparatively more appropriate translation than another one if I put the robot, so my translation of social distancing, back into the fish or the fishes or the dynamic of the fish population that I want to investigate. And if I see that fishes and robots interact, that means that they, speak the same language. That means that I was able to translate one possible element of the fish population that we want to understand, and I got it and translated into technical artifacts. And this translation, if I use it, I can enter into a form of life that is unknown to me, which is the form of life of fishes here. So the fact that fishes in the experiments positively react to a robot that was the perfect copy, morphologically and functionally speaking, of their, of the fishes in the experiments, and they, rejected a robot that has some sort of anomalies, means that I got it right in a common sense. I got, the source text. I was able to translate some elements of the source text into different languages. So reversibility in the sense that I can put the robot back into the original, the original environment and see if it, enter it from a different perspective. Did you have a question on this, or since you raise your hand?
I mean, the way you, thanks for what you're explaining, but the way you explain it, it sounds more like if it would be a larger concept, but both the locomotion of the salamander and the reaction of the fish population to the altered fish is only like a limited aspect of their life.
Sure.
Right? I mean, we have to keep that in mind. So it's a little bit the same as with your example with the translation. If we focus on the simple word of sugo, we will get maybe a good translation, but you will always have to see it in the whole system, and then it gets more difficult.
I perfectly agree with you. I mean, it's not that's my next point. I mean, it's an epistemic translation. It's a functional translation. It's not about like, that we translate or that we, are able to translate, the nature per se, but it's about this kind of translation on the epistemic level, based on our ability to perceive and manipulate the world, rather than it's not about like an ontological level. So, and the fact that we are able to translate a tiny element of nature, it's I'm perfectly fine with that. So it's it's part of the daily job. That's particularly this kind of little elements are the most problematic ones. We should understand and grasp, exactly as the sugo of the story in Manzoni's work. So again, it's maybe it must be considered a tiny little aspects of the whole story, but that's the most important one, since it's about how we perceive and act the world and how we understand something which is that is out there, so in nature. And plus, it's about the epistemological level, so how we act when we want to understand something. And the process of translation and reversibility shows how different languages can be, the technological and the biological one in that case, can be related while preserving the differences between the nature and the technological world, since a robot is not an organism, and an organism is not a robot, but there is something in common there, right? And we can translate back and forth, preserving the fact that the robot is not an organism and the organism is not a robot. So this kind of divide is holds. And this reveals both the limitations and the capabilities of organisms and biorobotics objects. Since translations, the robotic translation, the technological translations, or our translation of nature is never completely reversible, researchers must focus on the most difficult elements to translate and try to find functional equivalents within their technical, practices. If this am I more or less, or maybe not, convincing you on this epistemological level, but we'll discuss, soon, or in more, details in a couple of minutes. Still, the question, or my question, needs to be still addressed and answered, which is what concepts or features of of the human being emerge from these scientific practices. And what is the meaning of this, this solution of crossing of boundaries between, technology, biology, etc., etc. Again, the solution of boundaries is epistemological, ontological. It's about how we perceive, classify, construct, design the world. And when we design the world, we translate different languages to see to what extent our translation is more appropriate than others, since scientists used to construct different models and then pick up one instead of others. Why? Since we can translate or retranslate what we have translated back into original one. Let's put it that way. There's the principle of reversibility, and etc., etc., etc. So if I'm, convincing you about this bunch of different concepts, then the image of the human being, so the human in the loop in bio-inspired biorobotics technologies and many other technologies, is that of the Homo translator, which is sort of, a figure in between different possibility that arises in mediation and, mediate between holistic scenarios. This, though, doesn't mean that the Homo translator, so this anthropological figure that I'm proposing here, is the only essential characteristic or features of the human being. So the I'm thinking magma, the only metaphysical the monolithic definition of the human being. On the contrary, by supporting the functionalistic and situational approach of translation that I've proposed here, humans assumes the role of the Homo translator in the production of bio-inspired technologies and the production of different kinds of technologies. In this context, and only in this context or in this game, and only in this game, they assume these characteristics, and thus, show us that there is, an intrinsic polysemy or polysemantic, dimension in the definition of the human being. In other words, when humans play the technological game of robotics and similar disciplines, they, become, or they can be classified as, Homo translator in this context. Underlying this definition and the role of human as mediators and translators between two different systems, the biological and the technological, I'm here supporting at least one sentence written by Tim Ingold, which is the grammatical form of the human is not that of the subject, whether nominal or pronominal, but that of the verb. Humans must therefore be understood in terms of processes depending on their activities and games in which they are involved. Okay, so returning to the initial question of this presentation. What kind of boundaries or dissolution of boundaries are we talking about? Remember PNSA papers or recently published papers, dissolution of boundaries, we are becoming evolutionary new entity, whatever. And what kind of image of the human being does this dissolution of boundary, or the humanity in a very general metaphysical sense, this dissolution of boundary creates? Following, a kind of Kantian argument, I have, argued and hopefully shown how boundaries and not barriers are dissolving. The dissolution of boundaries takes place on the level of cognition, not on the metaphysical and ontological level. Boundaries between biology and technology, and it's important to emphasize that I am talking about the disciplines here and not the things themselves. Remember Kant's quote, not talking about nature itself, but biology is a discipline. So the boundaries between disciplines are blurred. What distinguishes these two language games, when they encounter each other, is a practical decision. In this context, Peirce wrote in this third Harvard lecture the following. Here is a sheet of paper of which one part is red and the other one is blue. Every point is either red or blue. The boundary between them forms a line. Now, is the line red or blue? You cannot say it's red on one side and blue on the other. A line is not double and has not different strips of color. It's all red or blue or all both at once and all neither. It's plenty as much. Oh, waarom?
Ja.
Yeah,
Dat
sorry.
even safe.
It's plenty as much. So there are two areas, the red and the blue, Peirce quotes, or biology and technology, that constantly connect and dissolve when they meet. Knowledge is precisely this constant crossing
Uau!
of the
Eu sou
threshold
demais!
of the boundary.
Just wait a
Yeah.
Aí eu tô passando me perdi.
Sorry, everybody who is listening to the speech of Marco, please shut down your microphone because we're listening to everything.
With wow and you know.
Somebody has put on
okay, yeah,
its microphone. Please shut it down.
So two areas, blue and red, Peirce or biology and technology, and that constantly, and knowledge is precisely this constant crossing of the threshold of the boundary. Secondly, why do we translate? Gadamer wrote the following. When someone truly masters a language, translation is no longer necessary. Indeed, any translation seems impossible. Understanding a language is not really understanding at all and does not involve any process of interpretation, but is rather a way of life. One understands a language by living in it. A statement then, as we know, applies not only to living language, but also to dead languages. What lies beyond the boundaries appears here in all its full meaning. We translate because we do not understand. And we do not understand in two respects. On the one hand, as Wittgenstein reminds us, if a lion could speak, we would not be able to understand him. Because the forms of life are different, or so different. On the other, we do not fully understand the world, the world before us or in front of us. We do not understand why technical structures can be recognized in nature. The Kantian problems of the technology of nature or whatever. So we don't understand why there is technology out there in nature, and we can take full advantage of it. That is why we translate. That is why we translate it. That is why we translate nature. That is why we translate these forms of life. The boundaries then remind us and confront us with our, with our little understanding of nature, forces us to act accordingly. Thank you.